welcome, and thank you all for being here. I know that there are people who were on buses yesterday afternoon and last night, people who got up very, very early in the morning, and people who had to make a lot of sacrifice and go through a lot of inconvenience to be here. And I want to tell you, it is absolutely worth it. It is absolutely the right thing for you to be doing today, is lifting your voices up to the folks across the street at the state capitol to make sure that we as caregivers are heard today, and heard very loud and very clear. There is, if you could just imagine for a second, a state with a big budget deficit, in a dark economy, in the middle of a recession, and someone says, I've got an idea. How about we give a big raise to all these caregivers and give them benefits they've never had before, and help them organize a union, and give them the ability to sit at the table and help write a piece of the state budget. Well, if you had asked anyone in Olympia, any reporter, any politician, any of the legislative staff, any of the lobbyists in the year 2000, whether it was likely that over the next very short number of years, a group of people making just a little bit more than the minimum wage, $7.18 at the time, without any health care benefits, dental, vision, vacation leave, paid holidays, mileage reimbursement, L&I, workers' compensation coverage, if that they were going to somehow show up at the Capitol and win significant pay increases, significant benefits, tax withholding, L&I, all of that, during the middle of a deep, dark recession, most people in Olympia would have laughed. But that is exactly what we did. Because in the year 2000, late in the year 2000, a group of caregivers started organizing this union. I remember the very first lobby day. There were probably 16 people there in February of 2001. And what we did not win in 2001 in the legislative session was the right to have a bargaining unit and negotiate a contract for the individual provider caregivers. We won a 50-cent raise up to $7.68 an hour, still no benefits, but we wouldn't take no for an answer. And so caregivers actually put on the ballot as an initiative, Initiative 775, which gave us the right to actually form a union and bargain a contract. And we came back the next year, and the next year, and the next year, and over the course of those 4 years, we won the right to have a union, we won our union, we won our first contract, we saw wages go up by $1.25, we saw health benefits for the first time, dental and vision and L&I compensation, workers' comp coverage for the very first time, during a deep, dark recession after 9/11, when no one in Olympia thought that some of the poorest, most invisible workers in the state could possibly gain the power to win hundreds of millions of dollars in new wages and benefits. But we did it. We did it. We did it because this organization is the way that ordinary people accomplish extraordinary things. That the invisible became visible and that the powerless became powerful through, not because they had a lot of money or a lot of influence, but through the simple principle of solidarity. That through the simple acts of strength and courage, together we are stronger together than we ever could be as one. And while those 16 caregivers at that first lobby day who worked for one small home care agency didn't have the strength to get the legislature to do what they wanted them to do, that 43,000 of us united together in a strong union often do have that strength. And we never back down. We don't take no for an answer. When things get dark and things get dim, as they have during this last 4 years of recession, we don't give up. We hang together. We stay strong, and we come back until the fight is over. Am I right, sisters and brothers? So we're here today knowing that the fight is not over, that we accomplished many amazing things together, but we are not going to be done until you never have to take a vow of poverty to be a caregiver in this state ever again, right? That we've got our eye on a North Star that is far bigger than one raise, one cost of living adjustment, 1 hour's cut or the restoration of an hour's cut, Medicaid expansion, fair taxation. That's all incredibly important. And that's what we're going to spend today talking about. But it's because we have a true purpose. And that true purpose is that we respect work. We honor workers. We believe that if you work hard 8 hours a day, you deserve a shot at the American dream. It's not about taking back the house. It's about the ability to own a house. It's not about right or left. It's about right or wrong. And what has happened to workers in this country, sisters and brothers, is simply wrong. Now, I remember my childhood. I remember as a boy celebrating our nation's bicentennial. It was this great patriotic moment. When in 1976, we were able to celebrate the 200th anniversary of America. And, whatever they might want to teach you, America was not born in perfection. Right? What we had, though, was we had this dream enshrined in our founding documents of liberty and justice for all. And we didn't have liberty and justice for all in the year 1776. But every generation for 200 years, we passed along more liberty and more justice to the generation that came next. That was the American dream. Not perfection, but better. The constant striving for more achievement, for more liberty, for more justice, and for a more broadly shared prosperity that through struggle allowed us to create a great American middle class and broadly shared prosperity. In the neighborhood I grew up, it was completely normal for a middle-aged factory worker to live next door to a young doctor or a young lawyer because they all shared in that great American dream. The idea that hard work and playing by the rules would in fact give you opportunity. Now, if you'd asked for a vote in the year 1976 and said, we've got an idea. You can imagine Jerry Ford or Jimmy Carter giving this speech, right? I've got an idea. How about we end the lines for gasoline? And we don't have double-digit inflation and unemployment anymore. And how about we end the Cold War, and the Berlin Wall is going to come down, and there's not going to be any more foreign military threats to U.S. soil. And how about in our country, we invent new industries and new ideas that over the next generation will create more wealth than has been created in the entire history of humankind. Well, that would have been pretty fantastical to hear in 1976, right? But it all actually came true. Right? It all actually came true. But then imagine if the speech went on, and I suggest that we give 93% of all that wealth to the top 1% of income earners. And let's give the next 7% of that wealth to the top 10% of income earners. Let's make sure that the 400 richest families in the country actually control close to half of all the wealth. And let's import third world wages, offshore manufacturing, let's bust the unions, get rid of pensions for private sector workers, transfer healthcare costs onto consumers, shred the social service safety net, send more seniors into retirement still owing student loan debt. This would have been good ideas, right? In fact, if Jimmy Carter or Gerald Ford had given that speech, I mean, imagine this, right? Oh, and by the way, the net economic impact of women doubling their workforce participation over 30 years will be no increase in take-home pay for the average family. Right? That's a great idea, right? Well, if someone had said that in 1976 and had been running for president, guess what? They would have lost the election, right? They would have lost the election. Their party probably would have been out of power for a generation. But even though no one would have ever voted for it, those are the realities that became true for American workers over the next 40 years. Right? We never voted to actually say, you know what, I think it would be a really good idea if everyone had less spending power than they did in 1969. Right? That's what we got. We never said it would be a really good idea if only 5 million Americans had a defined benefit pension plan. But that's what we got. We never said, you know, I think everyone should have to pay thousands of dollars out of pocket for their health care every year. But that's what we got. And we didn't get it because America got poorer. America got richer. We didn't get those set of outcomes because somehow we had this national contraction of the economy we all had to do with a little less. That's not what happened. That's what some people want you to believe. Some people want you to believe that decades of reckless social spending and unproductive, lazy workers are the reason that we are in an economic mess. Guess what? The stock market is at an all-time high. There is more wealth in this country than there ever was, more than in 1976, more than in 1956, more than in the year 2000. There was only 1 year during the Great Recession that anyone on Wall Street saw their stock values go down or their bonuses shrink, right? But for everybody else, we are still living with the hangover not of reckless social spending and lazy workers, but of reckless gambling on Wall Street and greedy capitalists who think that they can cook the books, buy all the politicians, change the rules so that they're the only ones who benefit from the economy, and they think that's patriotism, and the rest of us just have to tighten our belt. And we are here today, sisters and brothers, to say that is the wrong plan, and we need a new plan. But the bad news, I'm afraid, is that if some of you are hoping that there is some group of people in some other room somewhere who's in charge of coming up with that plan, you are sadly wrong. Now, I happen to admire the president, but his day, I would imagine, I can only imagine, is probably carved up into 15-minute chunks of dealing with foreign crises and economic crises and confirming the latest cabinet appointee. By the time you get a job like that, you don't have the luxury of spending 30 minutes thinking about how to create the next American middle class. And by the time you are, and I get to, because I am the voice of this organization, I get to, or maybe I should say have to, talk to people like governors or US senators. And what I tell them very often is, you know what, it may not be your fault that you got elected at a moment when the middle class and the American dream are at risk, but it will be your fault if you don't do anything about it, right? And so the message I would have for the people across the street today, you know, some of them are good people, some of them are hardworking people, some of them are even union members in their regular jobs. Some of them aren't such good people and aren't so smart and aren't really all that nice. You can make those judgments for yourself after you meet them. But they're just like you and me. They're regular people. They're citizen legislators. They got elected down here. And it may not be the fault the times they were born into or the circumstances that were here when they arrived. But it will be their fault if they don't do anything about it, right? Because I think we actually have a pretty simple and pretty reasonable plan. It's called this. If people who work hard for a living make a fair wage and good benefits, then they can afford to care for their families, and then they can also afford to participate in our economy. So, for example, if a caregiver made a living wage in this state, several things would happen. Number one is they wouldn't be poor anymore. Number two, they could afford to buy stuff. When they bought stuff, there would be some people who got jobs selling stuff and other people who get jobs making stuff. And then they would also pay taxes on those wages, which would mean that we wouldn't have a state budget crisis. In fact, if wages in this country had kept up with the cost of living since the late 1970s, Medicare would be solvent for another 75 years. Social Security would be solvent forever, and there would be no federal budget deficit. Because the taxes that we pay on our wages is actually what supports government, and when they turn around and reinvest that in things like healthcare and education and transportation and infrastructure, that creates jobs, creates the wealth, creates broadly shared prosperity, lets us go to work, make a fair pay, and it's an upward spiral. You see what I mean? Like the more we make, the more good we can do, the more we can participate in the economy. Not only does that mean like we don't have to have a third job, but we can spend more time with our family and our community, but it also means that we are in turn growing the economy from the middle out, right? Because as we participate, then everyone else benefits, because as we buy stuff, as we invest, as we save, that creates jobs for other people, and that then in turn helps them do the same thing. It's sort of like we all do better when we all do better, right? Even the rich would do better, right? I gave a speech to the Seattle Chamber of Commerce, which is all these business guys, last year, and I said, you ought to be very careful what you wish for. Because if what you really want is to pay everyone the lowest wage they can possibly make, and make sure you don't have to pay them benefits and don't give them sick leave and all that, that may work as far as increasing your profit this quarter. But I don't know what your life is going to be like 10 years from now if no one can afford to buy the products and services you're selling. Who can run a business like that, right? And I said to the head of I was meeting with the head of a major airline, and I was trying to convince him that he might want to think about whether the people who put fuel in the aircraft and cleaned the aircraft made a living wage. And I said, wouldn't it be cool if the people putting jet fuel into your jets could actually afford to buy a ticket on one? And he looked at me like it was some sort of new idea. Oh, well, that's really interesting. I'd have to think about that. So you see how confused people get when they become powerful or wealthy. They somehow start to mistake their own interests for everybody else's interests. And somehow weird things start to take place, like somehow less economic activity will result in more economic activity, which I still can't figure out. Or if you just give a lot of goodies to billionaires, somehow it will trickle down to the rest of us. Well, that's actually just not true. Because unlike them, we don't have Swiss bank accounts or businesses, shell corporations in the Cayman Islands we can send the money to stop paying taxes. We just make a living and pay taxes and then go buy stuff and everyone benefits. If you give the goodies to billionaires and they say, trust me, I'll just create some jobs. Yeah. I saw an application for a tax loophole once in the state of Wisconsin. And it's like, okay, you start reading this, like, okay, this company is applying to the state of Wisconsin to get this tax loophole. And it turns out they were applying for some special tax loophole. And he read through the fine print, and it was going to create 2 jobs, making the minimum wage at a Dairy Queen. And somehow it made sense in their minds. Oh, we'll just get the taxpayers to pay for it. Right? And so you're going to hear a lot across the street today, we can't afford this, we've got a budget crisis, that, blah, 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 blah. That's all true on paper. If you look at a snapshot in time, it's true the state needs more money than it has. But we need to ask them why, right? And I'll tell you why. We've got some of the richest and most powerful corporations on the planet who do business here in Washington State who have no net tax liability to the state, right? None. So the chances that all of you are paying more in taxes than a large software company on the eastern shores of Lake Washington are really, really high. And we sent out a press release on April Fool's Day back in, I think, 2003. We said, okay, well, all the caregivers are going to leave the state, just like Boeing threatened to leave the state. Yeah, we're going to leave the state. We're going to leave the state. Unless you give us $3.2 billion, we're just going to leave the state. So where's ours? Right? But all kidding aside, because that was sort of a funny April Fool's joke, we are here today for a very serious purpose. And that is this. The folks across the street have real choices to make. There are contracts that will be funded or not funded. There are agency parity that will or will not get funded. There is Medicaid expansion that will or will not happen and happen right. I'm really proud that this union managed to negotiate and maintain through the darkest recession since the Great Depression really good health benefits for our members who work 50% and up time, 86 hours or up. You get really good health care through the union. But your dependents don't give it. And if your hours get cut and you fall below 86, you don't get it, right? So that means probably 25% of the people in the union don't actually have health care coverage, right? And if Medicaid expansion happens, it will be the single biggest economic change to impact working Americans for the better since the 1960s. Since the 1960s. So if you are one of those people or people in your family are one of those people who right now do not have health benefits, imagine how different your life will be like a year from now if you can go to the doctor without worrying about losing your house. Right? Imagine how much life would be different if you didn't have to make a choice between groceries and prescriptions and rent. Right? And these are the real choices that working people face every day. The real choices that people across the street in the legislature face every day are whether or not to do the right thing or whether or not to do the easy thing. And we're here today to help them do the right thing. Because the easy, right? Because it's easy to say to the corporate lobbyists and the people with the tax loopholes and the people who are the top 1% of income earners who pay only 3% of their income in state taxes, no, we won't change anything. We won't change anything. We won't raise any revenue. We won't rock any boats. And we'll just let things lie. But the problem with letting things lie is that tends to favor those who are already in power and those who already have the wealth. And we're here today instead to help them do the right thing. To say it is the right thing morally and ethically and in every humane sense of the word that people who go to work providing life-sustaining support for the frailest and most disabled people in our state should not have to take a vow of poverty to do that. It is also the right thing for the economy. It is not just the moral thing, it's the right economic thing. Because as you are able to get this contract funded, 14% of you, those who are the most experienced caregivers with the most training, will be making a top wage of over $15 an hour by the end of the contract, right? And we'll be the first home care workers in the country to actually earn a living wage, the very first, right? That's a pretty big deal. I don't know where our Vice President Adam Glickman is, who negotiated that contract, and those of you who served on the bargaining team, congratulations. That is really amazing work. Really amazing work. But it is also only a promissory note on the full bill of economic justice that will now come due, because it's great to have the contract negotiated. Now it has to be funded. Right? And it has to be funded not by cutting hours or shorting agency parity or any of the other tricks they might come up with. It's got to be funded straightforward in the budget by doing the right thing and saying it may cost money, it may be hard, it may mean there are other people that we have to say it's time for you to pay your fair share, but Damn it, it is the right thing to do. So I'll close in a moment, but I like to think about my grandfather, who was born in the 1913, I think. He'd be 100 this year in a few weeks. And he passed away many years ago. But he, in his time, public school ended at about 8th grade. That was the highest level of public school in a place called Liberty, Kentucky in the 1920s. And he took a job at a sawmill where they'd hire you for a 10-hour shift, and then if the wood was all cut after 9 hours, they'd lay you off without a paycheck because you didn't work the full 10-hour shift. And he, rode boxcars during the Great Depression, looking for work around the country, and trained mules, and ran a little general store. And whenever the economy was good and factories were hiring in the city, he'd move to the city and take a factory job. And at some point, he actually got one of those jobs permanently at General Motors. And he worked on an assembly line and made cars for the last 25 years of his career before he retired. And he was not a well-read man. He could read the Bible and Reader's Digest and his Union magazine, and that was about the only reading material I ever saw at his house. But he was honest, and he was hardworking, and he was willing to use his body to create wealth for what was then the largest corporation on earth. And in exchange for that, he got a slice of the American dream. Because although he was born in deep poverty, and although he lacked an education, he retired with a pension, with a home that he owned in his own name, with 2 cars in the garage, half an acre of garden out back where he died while he was weeding his rutabagas at age 86. And when his widow needed to go into the nursing home, she never had to go on Medicaid because of his pension and his savings, right? And through hard work and a strong union, the UAW, he and his coworkers were able to make the world's largest corporation say yes when they wanted to say no. And so our job today is to go across the street and make the legislature, even the ones who want to say no, say yes. Through our strength, through our unity, through the compelling stories we have to tell, and by holding them accountable to doing what's right. So I want to thank everyone for being here. Have a great day. Go across the street. Get this work done. We are going to bring victory home this legislative session. Thank you very much, sisters and brothers.